Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Bean Family Stories channel. This is where we bring you interesting, funny and inspiring stories from Mr. Bean family every day. You will meet me, Mr. Bean's daughter, someone you may be familiar with and I hope you love, my dad with his surprising and meaningful stories, and my lovely brother who always brings positive energy with his stories close to life. Every day, one of us will share new stories, interesting journeys, and today it's my turn. I will take you on an exciting adventure, but also with profound lessons about life. Today's story carries a simple but important message: never judge something by its appearance. Behind that appearance, there are always surprises waiting for us. If you like our family dynamic, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our stories on this amazing journey. Share this video with your friends, family, and loved ones, and don't forget to leave some interesting comments to let me know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story and dive into the world of surprises. Let's get started. The soft morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, casting warm hues across the modest suburban home in Oaked, Connecticut. Inside, Abigail Abby Turner moved gracefully around the small kitchen, preparing lunches for her two children. The rhythmic clinking of utensils and the gentle hum of a lullaby filled the air. It was a familiar routine, a life she had embraced fully after the choices she had made 15 years ago. Abby's movements were calm and methodical, but there was something undeniably soulful about the way she hummed as she worked. Her voice, though soft, carried an unexpected richness, a depth that seemed to speak of something far greater than the ordinary life she now led. As she added a slice of cheese to a sandwich, the melody seemed to float around the room, filling the quiet spaces. "Mom, you're doing it again," came the voice of her 12-year-old daughter, Emily, who stood in the doorway with a teasing smile on her face. Abby paused mid-motion, blinking as she realized she had been unconsciously singing an aria from Puccini's La Bohème, a piece she hadn't performed in years. "Old habits," she replied with a small laugh, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a trace of melancholy hidden behind her casual tone. Abby quickly shifted her focus, turning back to the task at hand. The sandwich was now complete, and she moved on to packing snacks for Emily's lunchbox. Emily, wise beyond her years, gave her mother a knowing glance. "You used to sing all the time, remember? In the competitions, the performances, everything." Abby's hands faltered for a moment, then she smiled at her daughter, her face brightening. "I remember," she said softly. "But that was a lifetime ago." Her words hung in the air, filled with layers of meaning that Emily, in her youthful innocence, couldn't fully comprehend. A small framed photograph caught Abby's eye as she set the sandwich on the counter. It was tucked between family pictures, almost hidden, an old, yellowing photo of a much younger Abby, sitting at a grand piano. Her eyes were closed in concentration, a faint spotlight casting her face in soft, glowing light. It was a reminder of the days when she had been a rising star at the prestigious Westmore Academy of Music, her name whispered in the same breath as the greatest young talents of her generation. 15 years had passed since that photo was taken. 15 years since Abby had made a choice that, while necessary, felt like a sacrifice. She had been on the fast track to a career in opera, an international star in the making, until life had pulled her in a different direction. Her father's stroke had been the catalyst, the turning point. Her mother had long passed, and with no siblings to help, Abby made the decision to step away from her dreams and care for her father. Family had come first, always. Her husband, Daniel, entered the kitchen at that moment, his presence a comforting anchor in the whirlwind of Abby's thoughts. He kissed her cheek as he passed by, setting a mug of coffee on the counter before sitting down at the table. "The kids' music teacher mentioned you again yesterday," Daniel remarked casually, his tone light but tinged with genuine interest. "She still can't believe you studied at Westmore." Abby smiled faintly, but there was a distant look in her eyes. "That was another lifetime, Daniel," she murmured. "A lifetime ago." Daniel watched her closely, sensing the underlying tension in her voice. "You know, it's okay to miss it," he said, his voice soft. You don't have to hide it from me. I see it in your eyes sometimes. You still love music, Abby. And you always will. She shook her head, turning away slightly to hide the emotion creeping up inside her. I love it. But it's not my life anymore. My life is here, with you and the kids. There was finality in her tone, though the unease in her heart suggested otherwise. Daniel didn't push. He knew better than anyone that Abby had always put her family first. He respected that, even if part of him longed to see her reclaim the dreams she had left behind. As Abby moved to the stove, the sound of the coffee percolating was the only noise in the room for a moment. Emily had gone upstairs to finish getting ready for school, and the house was calm, peaceful, almost serene. But Abby felt a stirring deep within, something that hadn't been there before. The hum of the melody still lingered in the air, like a distant memory, reminding her of a part of herself she had long since buried. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as she prepared to send the kids off to school. But before she could finish her task, the mail arrived, a stack of letters and bills, but one envelope stood out. Elegant. Cream-colored. It bore the familiar gold seal of Westmore Academy. Abby's hand trembled slightly as she opened it, her heart skipping a beat. The letter inside was an invitation to a special event. The Academy was celebrating its 25th anniversary of musical excellence, and they were gathering alumni to honor the institution's legacy. Her fingers lingered on the paper as she read the words aloud, almost as if trying to grasp the full meaning. The board of directors requests the honor of your presence. Daniel, ever observant, turned from his coffee. The anniversary gala, he said, his voice tinged with curiosity. They're inviting you? After all this time? Abby nodded slowly, her mind racing. It says they're gathering alumni. I don't know why they would include me, Daniel. I haven't performed in years. I wasn't even a graduate. Daniel didn't answer immediately, watching her face carefully. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict stirring just beneath the surface. But then he smiled, a reassuring smile. Maybe because you were extraordinary, Abby. She shook her head, but a small flicker of something, hope, maybe, or regret, crossed her expression before she quickly masked it. That was a long time ago, she murmured again, this time more to herself than to Daniel. And yet, as she placed the invitation on the counter, she couldn't quite bring herself to discard it, even though every part of her was telling her to do just that. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Abby found herself sitting in the small study, her eyes scanning the invitation once more. The faint glow from the desk lamp illuminated the elegant words on the page, but it didn't bring her any clarity. She had already decided once, years ago, that she would put music behind her. Yet, as the words from the letter echoed in her mind, a stirring deep inside her made her question if she had made the right choice. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Abby sighed deeply, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the invitation as her mind wandered back to the days when she had been a bright young talent. Those memories, of rehearsals, performances, and late nights at Westmore Academy, had faded with time, but they were still there, quietly tucked away in the recesses of her heart. Suddenly, her fingers found the familiar keyboard of her laptop. Without thinking, she clicked on the browser and began searching for something, anything related to Westmore, to the gala, or even just a glimpse of the world she had left behind. She didn't realize how much time had passed until the screen in front of her grew dim from inactivity. The page she had landed on was an archived video from one of the recitals she had performed at Westmore before walking away from it all. She hadn't watched it in years. Abby hesitated. Should she click play? The thought of seeing her younger self, full of promise and ambition, unsettled her. But curiosity won over. With a deep breath, she clicked the play button. The screen flickered for a moment, and there she was, a younger version of herself, standing center stage, her voice filling the hall with power and grace. She watched in silence, the performance unfolding like a distant memory. Her voice had been so confident then, so effortless. The applause, the admiration, it all felt so surreal now. When the video ended, Abby sat motionless, staring at the screen. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to even think about those days, let alone revisit them. Her gaze drifted to the small framed photo of herself in the kitchen, the one from Westmore, the one where she had been a rising star. "You should go," Daniel's voice broke the silence, startling Abby. He had quietly entered the study without her noticing. Abby blinked, momentarily disoriented. She hadn't expected him to be awake still. "Go where?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of unspoken emotions. "To the gala," Daniel replied gently, sitting next to her. His eyes were warm, his expression filled with the quiet understanding that came from years of knowing her so well. "It's an opportunity, Abby. An opportunity to reconnect with a part of yourself that you've kept hidden. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. But maybe you should do this for you." Abby shook her head, trying to deflect the emotions that were bubbling to the surface. "I don't belong in that world anymore, Daniel. It's not my life." "But maybe it's not about them," he said, his voice steady, filled with the wisdom of someone who had always supported her choices, even when they were hard to understand. "Maybe it's about making peace with a part of yourself you've kept locked away." Abby closed her eyes, his words sinking deep into her. Peace. That was what she had sought when she walked away from her dreams, peace for her family, for her father. And in doing so, she had buried the parts of herself that had once burned with ambition and passion. She opened her eyes to meet Daniel's gaze. "You think it's worth it?" she asked quietly. "Worth going back for one night, after all this time?" Daniel smiled softly, a reassurance only he could give. "I think it's worth it if it helps you find something you've lost. Even if it's just for one evening." A long silence stretched between them, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Abby's heart raced, her mind torn between the safety of her current life and the nagging pull of the woman she had once been, the woman who had dreamed of standing on grand stages, of singing for crowds that would applaud her talent. She glanced down at the invitation again. The gold seal glimmered in the soft light, as though it were calling her. With a deep breath, Abby reached out and placed her hand over the envelope. "Okay," she whispered to herself more than to Daniel. "I'll go." The days leading up to the gala passed in a blur. Abby found herself caught between the excitement and fear of revisiting a world she had long since walked away from. Her preparations for the evening felt strange, almost like she was getting ready for a costume party, one where she didn't quite belong. She dug through her closet, finding an old beige dress she had worn to a wedding years ago. It was simple, elegant, and at least it was the closest thing she had to something formal. The night before the event, she stood in front of the mirror, examining herself in the soft light of the bedroom. She tried to recall the last time she had dressed up for something that mattered. Her reflection seemed foreign to her, as though it belonged to someone else. The face staring back at her had a few more lines, a few more years, and the weight of decisions made. There was no makeup, no elaborate hairdo, nothing that resembled the glamorous image she had once imagined for herself. She looked plain. And yet, something in her stirred. She wasn't looking for approval or applause. She wasn't even sure if she was looking for a reason to perform. But as she stared at herself, she realized that this wasn't just about the gala. It was about reclaiming something lost. About remembering that she still had a voice that deserved to be heard, on her terms, in her own way. Her thoughts drifted back to Daniel's words, "Maybe it's about making peace with a part of yourself you've kept locked away." Abby took a deep breath. Tomorrow, she would face the people from her past, the ones who had watched her leave and probably never thought she'd return. But in the quiet of her home, in the peace of her family, Abby had already found the greatest fulfillment. Still, she knew that something inside her yearned for more, and the gala would be the first step in reclaiming that. The morning of the gala arrived with an unexpected chill in the air. Abby stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple beige dress she had chosen. It was the only formal attire she owned, a purchase made years ago for a cousin's wedding. Today, it felt like she was dressing for something much more significant, though she wasn't sure exactly what. Daniel stood by the doorway, watching her with an expression that mixed admiration and quiet concern. His eyes softened as he took in the way she fidgeted, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as she tugged at the fabric. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "You always do." Abby smiled faintly, offering a small nod as she turned to face him. Her hair, left natural and unadorned, framed her face in loose waves. There was no heavy makeup, no sparkle or sheen to distract from the woman standing in front of him. It was just Abby, the way she had been for years. She had put aside her glamorous aspirations long ago, choosing instead a quiet life filled with family and the simple joys of motherhood. But today, there was a weight to her that she couldn't shake. She glanced at herself one last time, taking in the unfamiliar reflection in front of her. The woman who once dreamed of international stages, of captivating audiences with her voice, was now a mother, a wife, a woman who had settled into a life of contentment, yet a part of her still longed for something more. "It's not about how I look," Abby murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. "It's about facing a choice I made 15 years ago." Her voice trailed off, the words unfinished, lost in the swirl of conflicting emotions inside her. Daniel didn't reply immediately. He knew what she meant. He had watched her for years, watching her give everything for the family, watching her set aside her dreams without ever looking back. But even he could see it in the way her eyes would light up when she hummed or played the piano, the way her fingers would move with an invisible rhythm when no one was looking. "Remember," he said quietly, walking toward her and gently placing his hands on her shoulders, "you have nothing to prove to anyone. Not to them. Not to yourself." Abby nodded, trying to believe him. There was a part of her that still felt like an outsider in this world she had once belonged to. She felt like a ghost at a party she had been invited to out of pity, not out of genuine desire. The familiar faces from Westmore Academy would be there, but they would all have moved on with their lives, their careers flourishing while hers had been put on hold. She shook her head, as though trying to clear the thoughts away. "It's just a gala," she said, her voice gaining a touch of resolve. "I'll go, make a quick appearance, and then come home." Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. "Exactly. And whatever happens, I'm proud of you. For everything." The words lingered in the room, and Abby felt a sense of comfort in them. But as she turned to grab her coat, her mind wandered back to the letter, to the invitation that had come from Westmore Academy. Why had they invited me? She wondered again. It had been years since she had even spoken to anyone from the academy, let alone attended a formal gathering like this one. She had left without a word of farewell, never looking back. The thought that they remembered her, that they still saw her as part of their legacy, was both humbling and confusing. As she and Daniel drove to the venue, the city lights flickered through the car windows, casting fleeting reflections in Abby's eyes. She tried to focus on the road, on the hum of the car, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "What am I doing here?" she asked herself. The grand hall where the gala would be held seemed like a world away from the life she had carved out for herself in Oaked. It was so far removed from the quiet, peaceful existence she had created with Daniel and the kids. The gala would be held in a lavish Manhattan venue, its grandeur the stark contrast to the simplicity of Abby's life now. It seemed to be a place where only the successful, the accomplished, the recognized were allowed to enter. As she thought about it, the unease in her stomach grew. Abby wasn't sure if she wanted to face those who had seen her as nothing more than a potential that had been left unfulfilled. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand, pulling her from her reverie. "Whatever happens, we'll be together," he said, his voice calm, unwavering. "And I'll be right by your side." Abby smiled softly at him, grateful for his support. She knew that without Daniel, she might never have made it this far. His belief in her, in all she had chosen, was something she had never taken for granted. As the car drew closer to the venue, Abby felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest. Her heart was racing, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was something else, something she hadn't felt in years: anticipation. This night, this gala, wasn't just a reunion with the past. It was something more. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance to face what she had once walked away from, to see if she could still reconnect with the woman who had dreamed of the stage. And yet, despite the questions swirling in her mind, Abby knew one thing for certain: this was a journey she had to take, no matter where it led. As Abby stepped out of the car, the cold night air bit at her skin, a stark reminder that she was no longer in the comfortable, quiet world of Oaked. She looked up at the grand entrance of the venue, the towering building shimmering with lights, its exterior a mix of old-world elegance and modern sophistication. The sight took her breath away for a moment, reminding her of the life she had once dreamed of. The life she had let go of, but never truly forgotten. Daniel helped her adjust the collar of her coat, offering her a smile that was both reassuring and knowing. "You're going to be fine," he said gently. "Just remember, this night isn't about anyone else. It's about you." Abby nodded, swallowing the lump that had suddenly formed in her throat. As they walked towards the entrance, she couldn't help but feel the eyes of others on her, even though there was no one around. The thought of returning to a world that had once been her own, yet now felt so foreign, was both exhilarating and terrifying. The gala was already in full swing by the time they arrived. Inside, the venue was a flurry of activity: alumni reconnecting, old colleagues exchanging stories, donors mingling with distinguished musicians and conductors. The air was thick with an unspoken competition, a subtle undercurrent of ambition and success. Everyone there had made it, had proven themselves, had achieved the level of fame and recognition that Abby had once aspired to. She stood at the edge of the room, her heart racing. It was as if the moment she stepped inside, she was transported back to her days at Westmore Academy, the rehearsals, the auditions, the fierce competition. She could almost hear the echoes of the past, the sound of her voice rising to meet the challenges of the stage, the applause that once seemed to follow her wherever she went. But that life felt like a distant dream now. The reality was that Abby had chosen something else. Something more tangible, more real, and yet, a part of her still wondered if she had made the right choice. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had let something important slip away, like a song unfinished, a note that never reached its full potential. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on familiar faces, former classmates, former rivals, each one more successful than the last. A few people nodded her way, their expressions unreadable. No one seemed to recognize her at first, and in a way, that was a relief. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face the questions they would undoubtedly ask. But then, a voice cut through the buzz of conversation, familiar and yet foreign at the same time. "Abigail Turner?" Abby froze. She turned, and there, standing with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, was Lawrence Blackwood. Her heart skipped a beat. Lawrence. She hadn't seen him in years, but she remembered him like it was yesterday. He had been her closest competitor at Westmore Academy, a man whose talent rivaled hers in every way. He had always been driven by perfection, a man who sought the spotlight with an unyielding desire to be the best. Their rivalry had been fierce, but it had also been a catalyst for her own growth. And now, here he was, the celebrated conductor, one of the most respected names in classical music. "Lawrence," Abby said, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. She gave him a polite smile, masking the discomfort she felt. "It's been a long time." Lawrence's smile widened, but there was a glint in his eyes that didn't sit well with her. "I hardly recognize you, Abigail. I must say, I never thought you'd be here tonight. It's been, 15 years?" He glanced around at the opulent surroundings, his eyes flicking back to her with a touch of surprise. "I have to admit, I didn't expect to see you among us. You disappeared so suddenly." There it was, the unspoken question. The one she had avoided for so long. Why had she left? Why had she given it all up? "I had my reasons," Abby replied, her voice calm, though she felt a flicker of irritation at the implication behind his words. Life changes, Lawrence. Sometimes you have to make difficult choices. He raised an eyebrow, his gaze never leaving hers. I suppose, he said with a slight shrug, but one would think that a talent like yours would have a much harder time walking away from it all. His voice dropped to a quieter, almost condescending tone. After all, you were destined for greatness. Abby felt a pang of something sharp and uncomfortable at the word destined. It was the same word people had used when they spoke of her at Westmore. She was destined to be a star. But she wasn't a star. She was a mother. A wife. And a woman who had chosen to live a different kind of life. She forced a smile, not wanting to engage in the subtle jab that Lawrence had thrown her way. I chose a different path, she said, her tone firm. One that worked for me. Lawrence tilted his head, studying her as if trying to read her. I always wondered, you know. What happened to the Abigail Turner who had it all? His voice was smooth, but there was something underneath, something almost mocking, as though he found it hard to believe she had truly walked away from her potential. The question hung in the air, and Abby felt a wave of emotions crashing over her: anger, regret, defiance. But instead of responding, she simply nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Lawrence, seeming to sense her discomfort, changed the subject quickly. Well, I won't keep you. There are a lot of people here who would love to catch up. His smile was polite, but there was no mistaking the faint amusement in his eyes. Abby watched him walk away, his back straight and proud as he rejoined his circle of admirers. She felt a bitter taste in her mouth. For a moment, she thought about following him, about finding her old friends, but the thought of having to explain herself, to answer those same tired questions about her choices, left her feeling weary. Instead, she walked slowly through the room, the crowd of faces blurring around her. She wasn't sure where she was going or what she was looking for, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let Lawrence, or anyone else, define her anymore. The evening after the gala, Abby found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the invitation to the 25th anniversary gala of Westmore Academy. The envelope was now open, its contents lying flat on the table, its gold seal gleaming in the morning light. Despite the event having passed, the invitation still lingered in her mind, tugging at something deep inside her, a reminder of a life she had once dreamed of but had put aside. The gala had been a whirlwind. She had stepped into the world she had abandoned so long ago, only to realize that it was no longer hers to claim. The old familiar faces of her former peers had all changed, just as she had. Their success, their recognition, had stung in ways she hadn't anticipated, but it had also stirred something in her, a quiet longing, a reminder of the woman she used to be. But Abby didn't belong in that world anymore. She knew it. The quiet, content life she had built with Daniel and the kids was all she had ever wanted. And yet, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been left behind, something that, for all its absence, still felt like an integral part of who she was. Mom, are you okay? Emily's voice broke through her thoughts. Abby hadn't noticed her daughter standing in the doorway, her school bag slung over her shoulder. Abby looked up, startled, but then smiled. Yeah, sweetie. I'm just thinking. She glanced down at the invitation again. It's nothing, really. Emily walked over to the table and sat down across from her, eyeing the letter curiously. What is that? She asked, pointing to the invitation. Is that from the place you used to go to? Westmore? Abby nodded slowly. Yes, it's an invitation to an alumni event. They were celebrating their anniversary. Emily's gaze softened, and she tilted her head. You don't seem excited about it. Abby let out a quiet sigh, folding the paper neatly. I went. I saw some old faces. It was fine, I guess. But I'm not sure it's the life I want to go back to. Emily watched her for a moment before speaking again, her voice surprisingly wise for a 12-year-old. I think you're more than just a mom, you know. You were someone before. You're still her, even if you don't wear the same clothes or sing on the same stages anymore. Abby's breath caught in her throat. I was someone before, she repeated, the words echoing in her mind. Her daughter's insight was both comforting and disorienting. Of course, she had once been someone. She had been Abby Turner, the girl with the big voice, the prodigy who everyone expected to make it. But that world had slipped through her fingers, replaced by the quiet responsibilities of family life. Abby smiled faintly. I guess I've always been someone, just not in the way they expected. Emily shrugged. Maybe that's a good thing. Abby chuckled softly, grateful for her daughter's simplicity. Maybe it is. But despite Emily's comforting words, Abby couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something inside her had been left unspoken, even unresolved. She had spent the past years burying her dreams in the quiet, routine tasks of motherhood. Yet the invitation to the gala, and the encounter with Lawrence Blackwood, had brought something to the surface, a part of her that had been waiting for permission to resurface. As the day wore on, Abby couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in her mind. Lawrence had spoken with that same condescending tone, as if he thought her decision to step away from the spotlight had been a mistake, an act of weakness. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how wrong he was. Her choice hadn't been one of surrender, it had been a choice of love, of devotion, of responsibility. She had made a decision that few could understand, but she had no regrets. Yet there was something about the way Lawrence had dismissed her, as though her voice, her passion, were something wasted, something to be pitied, that made her feel small, unseen. And perhaps that was why the invitation still sat on her kitchen table, lingering in her thoughts. Perhaps, deep down, it wasn't just a relic of her past, it was a challenge. A reminder that there was more to her than the woman who packed lunches and hummed softly while cleaning the house. Abby picked up the invitation again, holding it between her fingers. She could still remember the day she had left Westmore, the day she had walked away from it all to care for her father. The memory was bittersweet. Her father had been everything to her, his health, his happiness, her responsibility. But she had given up so much in the process. Could she have done both? Could she have cared for him and pursued her dreams at the same time? The question had haunted her for years. Now, 15 years later, with a family of her own and a life that she had built from the ground up, she realized how much she had sacrificed. She hadn't lost music, per se, but she had hidden it away, locked it in a box that she rarely opened. She had learned to live without it. But could she really say she had made peace with the choice? The next morning, Abby found herself staring at the invitation again, the gold seal catching the morning light. She had spent the night turning over her thoughts in a restless cycle, the lingering feeling that she had left something behind weighing heavily on her. Music had always been more than just a career to her, it had been a calling, a way of expressing everything she couldn't put into words. And now, sitting at her kitchen table, she wondered if she had abandoned that part of herself too quickly, too easily. Mom, can we go soon? Emily's voice interrupted her thoughts. Abby looked up to see her daughter, already dressed for school, waiting by the door with her backpack on. You promised to take me to the music store today to pick up my new sheet music. Abby blinked, surprised by how much time had passed. Of course, sweetie, she replied, quickly standing up. But even as she grabbed her coat and car keys, her mind remained focused on the letter in front of her. It's just a gala, she reminded herself. It's just a reunion. Nothing more. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about the reunion. The invitation felt like an opening, a door that, once unlocked, could never be shut again. The gala had stirred up emotions Abby thought she had long buried, emotions about the life she had left behind, about the woman she had once been and might still be, if only she allowed herself to be. The morning passed in a blur of errands, lunch prep, and the constant hum of daily life. But Abby couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had shifted. The music store with Emily, the conversations with Daniel, the gentle reminders of her past, it all seemed to point to the same question: what do I do now? That evening, as Daniel returned from work, Abby was still sitting at the kitchen table, the invitation resting before her. She hadn't made any decisions yet, but she knew that she needed to confront this part of herself, if only for a moment, to see if she could move forward. "Dinner's almost ready," Abby said, trying to sound normal, but she could tell by the way Daniel was looking at her that he knew something was on her mind. "Is it the invitation?" Daniel asked, sitting down beside her. Abby nodded. "I keep thinking about it. It feels like a test I'm not ready for." Daniel smiled softly. "You're not the only one who's been tested, Abby. Look at the life we've built. Look at the love we have. No one can take that away from you." Abby exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "I know. But I feel like I've been ignoring something. Something important. Maybe even a part of myself." Daniel reached over, placing his hand on hers. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You've already proved what matters most. But if you want to go back to it, to music, you can. And I'll be right here, no matter what." Abby looked at her husband, the man who had supported her through every challenge, every difficult decision. The man who had never questioned her choice to leave behind her career for their family. His words filled her with warmth, but they also stirred a small knot of fear in her chest. "What if I'm not who I was anymore?" Abby whispered. "What if I've changed too much?" "You're still you," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "The core of you is still the same. You've just grown. And maybe it's time to let some of those pieces of you that you've tucked away come back." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of truth that Abby hadn't fully understood until now. She had been so focused on the life she had chosen, on the family, the house, the quiet moments, that she had almost forgotten the fire that once burned within her. The fire that had driven her to be more than just a mother, more than just a wife. Abby stood up from the table, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. "I think I need to go," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Daniel's face softened with understanding. "To the gala?" "To whatever comes next," Abby said, her voice stronger now. She paused for a moment, looking at him. "I think it's time to find out if that part of me is still there." The next day, Abby drafted a response to the invitation. She didn't overthink it, didn't try to second-guess herself. She simply wrote, "Thank you for including me. I would be honored to attend." As she clicked the send button, she felt a wave of both excitement and nervousness wash over her. This was no longer just about attending a gala. It was about reclaiming something she had almost forgotten about, her voice, her passion, her dream. It was about standing up for the woman she had once been and seeing if that woman still had a place in her life. Later that evening, Abby found herself standing in front of her closet again, staring at the simple beige dress. She had thought about getting something new, something more glamorous. But then she remembered the words Daniel had said, "You're still you." And so, the beige dress would have to do. It wasn't about the glamour. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about walking into that room and knowing that she had made a choice for herself, a choice to be seen, to be heard. She picked it up, holding it in her hands for a moment. Then, with a deep breath, she began to prepare. Whatever happened at the gala, whatever came next, she was ready. She had found the courage to face the woman she used to be and ask if there was still room for her in the life she had now. The day of the gala arrived, and with it came a wave of uncertainty that Abby couldn't shake. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the fabric of the beige dress, trying to steady her breath. The small, intimate world she had built with Daniel and the kids in Oaked felt miles away now, as though she were about to step into a realm that no longer belonged to her. The grand hall where the event would take place was in stark contrast to the simplicity of her life. Abby wasn't sure what she had expected, but it certainly wasn't this feeling of disconnect. She hadn't told the kids about her decision to go. It felt like something they wouldn't quite understand, and Emily's innocent remarks from earlier still echoed in her mind. "You're more than just a mom, you know?" It had been a simple statement, but it had struck her harder than she cared to admit. Abby had spent so long defining herself by her family, by the quiet, meaningful life she had chosen, that she had almost forgotten who she was outside of that. Tonight, she would have to face that person, the one she used to be, the artist, the dreamer, the woman with a voice that could fill a room. "Are you ready?" Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway. His presence was a calming anchor in the whirlwind of emotions she was trying to contain. He was dressed in his best suit, looking every bit the part of a supportive husband, though Abby could tell he was just as anxious as she was. Abby nodded slowly, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think so." He walked over to her, his gaze softening as he studied her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "But more than that, you look like you're ready. Like you've made peace with this decision." She met his eyes, searching his expression for any hint of doubt, but found none. Daniel had always been her rock, the one person who had supported her unconditionally, no matter the choices she had made. He never questioned her decision to walk away from the stage, nor did he push her to return. But tonight, he could see something in her, something she had kept hidden for far too long. "I don't know if I'm ready," Abby admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think it's time to find out." Daniel smiled, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "Then let's go. No matter what happens, you've already shown everyone what matters most. You've built a life, a family, and that's more than enough." Abby felt a lump form in her throat as she tried to swallow the emotions threatening to spill over. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "I don't think I could do this without you." He kissed her forehead, and for a moment, Abby allowed herself to soak in the warmth of his support. With one last glance in the mirror, she felt a small surge of confidence. Maybe she wasn't just going back to a past life. Maybe, just maybe, she was about to find a way to integrate both parts of herself, the woman she had become and the artist she had buried. The car ride to Manhattan was filled with a quiet anticipation, the weight of what Abby was about to face hanging in the air between them. Daniel had been his usual calm self, chatting lightly about work, about the kids, about everything and nothing. But Abby could feel his tension, the way his hand occasionally brushed against hers as if offering silent reassurance. When they finally arrived at the venue, the stark contrast between the small, warm world she had created and the glamorous world before her became even more apparent. The venue stood tall, bathed in lights, with sleek black cars lined up outside, their doors opening to reveal elegantly dressed guests. Abby's heart beat faster as she stepped out of the car, the cold night air wrapping around her, heightening her awareness of how out of place she felt in this polished, perfect world. "This is it," Daniel said, his voice soft, almost reverential, as he stood beside her. "No matter what happens in there, you've already won, Abby." Abby took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. She hadn't realized how big this moment was until now, how much of herself she was about to expose, how much of her past would be put under the microscope of the people she had once known. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control, and the fear was overwhelming. But beneath it, there was a flicker of excitement. Taking Daniel's hand, Abby walked toward the entrance of the gala. As they passed the tall, polished doors, Abby felt a wave of doubt creep in. "Why am I doing this?" she wondered. "What if they look at me and see nothing but a failure, someone who walked away from her dreams?" But before she could entertain that thought any further, the doors opened, and they stepped into the grand hall. The room was everything Abby had imagined and more, glistening chandeliers overhead, walls adorned with photographs of the Academy's most famous alumni, the unmistakable hum of classical music filling the air. It was a world of success and achievement, a world she hadn't been a part of for 15 years. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on familiar faces, some warm and welcoming, others cold and distant. A few people greeted her with polite smiles, their expressions unreadable. Some seemed genuinely pleased to see her, while others looked her over with a kind of quiet curiosity, as though trying to figure out where she had gone wrong. But Abby didn't let herself be intimidated. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and with Daniel by her side, walked deeper into the heart of the room. The sounds of clinking glasses and quiet conversations surrounded Abby as she moved deeper into the grand hall. She felt a mixture of discomfort and exhilaration, as though the world she had once belonged to was both a distant memory and an unfamiliar present. The guests, all beautifully dressed and exuding an air of polished success, made Abby feel like an outsider. She was no longer the young, talented singer everyone had expected her to be. Now, she was a mother, a wife, a woman who had made different choices, and who still wondered if those choices had been the right ones. Daniel, ever the steady presence by her side, noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Do you want to sit down for a moment? Get comfortable before we mingle," he asked gently, his hand resting on her back. Abby hesitated, glancing around the room, feeling a sharp pang of uncertainty. "Maybe just for a minute," she said, her voice quiet. It was hard to breathe in the midst of the polished perfection surrounding her. She had left this world so many years ago, and yet, it still held a strange power over her, a power to make her question herself. They found a small table at the back of the room, away from the main crowd, and Abby sank into a chair, taking a deep breath. She felt oddly exposed, like everyone was watching her, waiting for her to slip up or say the wrong thing. Her thoughts were interrupted when Daniel squeezed her hand, his presence a quiet reminder of the love and support she had built her life on. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Abby," he said softly. "Remember, you're here for you, not for them." His words brought a small measure of peace, but Abby still couldn't shake the feeling that she was in the midst of something monumental. "Why did I even come?" she asked herself. "I don't belong here. I haven't belonged here in years." But before she could spiral too deep into her doubts, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Abby Turner? Is that really you?" Abby turned to see a woman approaching with a warm smile, her arms open for a hug. It took Abby a moment to recognize her, Professor Eleanor Winters, her former vocal coach at Westmore Academy. The last time Abby had seen her, it was under the harsh lights of the recital hall, just before she made the decision to leave it all behind. The professor's eyes softened as she drew Abby into a hug. "It's been so long," Professor Winters said, pulling back to look Abby over. "I never expected to see you here tonight." Abby smiled, the warmth of the embrace soothing some of the tension in her chest. "It's good to see you, Professor Winters," she replied, her voice a little shakier than she intended. She had always admired the professor's guidance and wisdom, and seeing her now, after all these years, made Abby feel both a sense of nostalgia and a sharp pang of regret. "You look wonderful," Professor Winters continued, her eyes scanning Abby with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "I must say, I'm surprised. You were always so talented, Abby. Everyone thought you would go far. What made you walk away from it all?" The question hit Abby like a wave, pulling her back to the moment she had so carefully avoided for years. She shifted in her seat, glancing at Daniel, who offered her a reassuring nod, but Abby still felt the weight of the question hanging in the air. "I chose family," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotions stirring inside her. "My father needed me, and I didn't think twice. I didn't want to regret not being there for him." Professor Winters nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I understand," she said, her tone gentle. "And I respect your decision, Abby. But sometimes, I think people forget that you can still have both the family, the career. I always wondered if you had any regrets. If, deep down, you still wanted to be on those stages, singing your heart out." The question lingered in the air, and Abby felt the walls inside her begin to crumble. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she had made the right choice, that it hadn't mattered, but now, hearing Professor Winters voice the unspoken truth, it was harder to deny. "I don't regret my choice," Abby said firmly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "But that doesn't mean I don't wonder what might have been." Professor Winters gave her a knowing look, and then she smiled warmly. "Maybe it's not too late, Abby. You still have that voice. I can see it in your eyes, the same spark that was there all those years ago. Abby felt a lump form in her throat as she nodded, unsure of what to say. She had never allowed herself to dream about that world again, the world of performances and applause. She had buried that part of her so deep that sometimes it felt like a distant echo. Before she could respond, Professor Winters was already moving on, waving to someone else in the crowd. "It was so good to see you again, Abby. Don't be a stranger," she called over her shoulder. Abby watched her walk away, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. She turned to Daniel, who had been quietly observing the exchange. "You were right," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I had buried inside until tonight." Daniel reached over, taking her hand. "You don't have to bury it anymore," he said, his voice filled with quiet understanding. "You have a choice, Abby. You always did." As the evening continued, Abby's mind was filled with the conversation with Professor Winters. What if it's not too late? She wondered. What if there's a way to bring both parts of me together, the artist and the mother, the woman who once dreamed and the woman who made a life for herself? But before she could entertain the thought any longer, a familiar voice broke through the crowd. "Abigail Turner? I never thought I'd see you here." Abby froze. She knew that voice. She knew it all too well. Abby's heart raced as she turned around, the familiar voice cutting through the noise of the gala. She knew that voice, knew it all too well. Lawrence Blackwood. His presence had been unsettling enough earlier in the evening, but now, hearing him speak her name with that tone, half curiosity, half amusement, stirred something deep inside her. "Abigail Turner?" His voice was smooth, dripping with a mix of disbelief and something harder, something she couldn't quite place. "I never thought I'd see you here." Abby froze for a moment, the room around her fading into the background. Lawrence stood before her, the same smug smile from earlier now replaced with a look of genuine surprise, though the edge of superiority still lingered in his eyes. His silver-streaked beard and perfectly tailored tuxedo only emphasized how much he had changed, how much his success had carved him into a figure she barely recognized. She had thought that she was done with this, done with Lawrence, with the rivalry they had shared at Westmore Academy. But here he was, standing in front of her, as if nothing had changed. His eyes were scanning her, evaluating, as if she were still the same aspiring artist he had once seen as a mere peer, perhaps a rival, but ultimately someone who hadn't lived up to her potential. "Lawrence," she said, her voice steady but betraying a flicker of the tension building inside her. She hadn't seen him in 15 years, and yet it felt like he was the same person he had always been, cunning, critical, never satisfied with anything less than perfection. She forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. "It's been a long time." "Far too long," Lawrence replied, his voice carrying just enough warmth to make the words seem almost sincere. But Abby didn't miss the undertone, the subtle challenge he was issuing without saying a word. "You look, well," he added, his eyes sweeping over her. "I didn't expect you to show up tonight, though. I figured you'd left that life behind for good." The words stung more than Abby was willing to admit. She could feel the years of self-doubt, the old insecurities, rising up to meet her. But she fought them down, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm here because I was invited," she said simply, her voice tight with controlled restraint. "I'm not sure what you expected." Lawrence chuckled softly, clearly enjoying the exchange. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I expected someone who would have gone on to do something more with their talent. A big name, a renowned voice, maybe." He tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with a mix of mockery and intrigue. "But then again, not everyone is willing to chase greatness. Some people prefer a quieter life, I suppose." The words hit Abby harder than she wanted to admit. He didn't understand. He couldn't. The decisions she had made, the sacrifices, those weren't things anyone could easily dismiss. But Lawrence seemed determined to do just that. And maybe that was why she was still here, standing before him, feeling like she was being pulled back into the world she had left behind. Abby drew in a steady breath. She wasn't about to let him provoke her into something she would regret. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly and met his gaze with quiet defiance. "I'm here because I was invited," she repeated, her voice firm. "Not because of anything you or anyone else expected." Lawrence raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her response. Well. It seems you still have some fire left in you. I'm impressed." He paused, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Abigail, do you ever wonder what could have been? Do you regret walking away from it all?" Abby's breath caught in her throat. The question, once again, hit too close to home. She didn't regret her choices, not really, but the doubt still crept in at times, especially when faced with someone like Lawrence. The man who had always been a step ahead, the man who had achieved everything she had once dreamed of. And yet, she couldn't let his success dictate her worth. "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "I don't regret my choices. I made them because they were right for me. And now, I'm living the life I've chosen." Lawrence studied her for a moment, his expression shifting slightly. "If you say so," he replied, his tone still dripping with subtle disdain. "But I wonder. What if you could have had both? What if you could have had the family, and the career, the fame, everything you ever wanted?" He leaned back, his arms folding across his chest. "Do you ever wonder about that?" Abby's mind flashed back to those days at Westmore, when she had stood on the cusp of greatness. She had been so close to achieving everything she had dreamed of. But then, when her father fell ill, she had walked away. She had chosen family. And in some ways, she had never looked back, until now. But Lawrence didn't understand that. He didn't understand the quiet sacrifices that had come with her choices. He didn't see that her decision had been one of love, not defeat. "No," Abby said again, her voice soft but firm. "I don't wonder about that anymore, Lawrence. I have what I need. I have a life I'm proud of." Lawrence seemed to consider this for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing her words. Then, with a sly smile, he shrugged. "Well, then," he said, his tone shifting to one of casual dismissal, "I suppose I can't change the past. But maybe you'll still have a chance to prove what you're capable of, to show us what might have been." Abby's heart skipped a beat as he stepped back, his smile widening with an almost predatory gleam in his eyes. He was challenging her. But she wasn't about to let him dictate her path. Not now. Not ever again. Abby's chest tightened as Lawrence stepped away, his words lingering in the air like an unspoken dare. She could feel the weight of the challenge, the subtle provocation embedded in his comment. But she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of showing any weakness. The gala was supposed to be a night of reconnecting, of finding some closure, so why did it feel like she was being pulled back into the very rivalry she thought she had left behind? She glanced over at Daniel, who had been quietly observing the exchange. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, as if silently reminding her that none of this mattered. She was here for herself, not for Lawrence, not for anyone else. Abby straightened up, pushing the flood of emotions aside. She wasn't going to let Lawrence dictate the course of her evening. She had come to this event for her own reasons, to see if she could still connect with the woman she once was, and more importantly, to remind herself that she was still in control of her choices. As the evening wore on, Abby did her best to focus on the people around her. There were some familiar faces, classmates who had long since moved on to bigger and brighter things. Many of them greeted her warmly, as if her decision to leave the world of opera hadn't been a topic of hushed whispers all those years ago. But Abby could see the curiosity in their eyes, the subtle questions hanging in the air, even if no one dared to ask them outright. The conversation turned to more casual topics, but Abby couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everyone was waiting for something more, something they had hoped to see from her all those years ago. "Abby, it's so good to see you," one of her old classmates, a woman named Claire, said warmly. Claire had always been one of the more supportive voices at Westmore, but now, there was something slightly wistful in her tone. I have to say, I never thought I'd see you back here. What have you been up to? I'm sure you've done something amazing with your life. Abby paused, unsure how to answer. She could tell that Claire was asking out of genuine interest, but she could also sense the underlying assumption that she had somehow wasted her potential by leaving the world of performance. I've been busy, Abby said, her smile steady but her mind racing. Family first, and a lot of work at home. You know, the usual. She kept her tone light, not wanting to delve into the deeper reasons behind her decision. But Claire didn't seem to catch the subtle distance in Abby's answer. She leaned in, clearly excited by the conversation. That's wonderful, Claire said, nodding. But you know, if you ever decide to come back, there's always room for you in the spotlight. I'm sure people would love to see you again. You were always so talented. It would be such a waste not to let that shine. The words hit Abby like a wave, and for a moment, she felt like she was drowning in them. Would it really be a waste? The question echoed in her mind, just as it had when Lawrence had spoken to her earlier. She had spent so many years convincing herself that her choices were the right ones, that she had made peace with stepping away from the stage. But now, in the midst of this night, with her past staring her in the face, she wasn't sure anymore. Abby felt a flicker of doubt creep into her mind, but she shoved it aside. I'm happy where I am, she said firmly. I've built a life I love. I don't need the spotlight to feel fulfilled. Claire's expression softened, and she gave Abby an understanding smile. I get it, she said gently, then changed the subject, sensing the conversation had reached its limit. Abby appreciated the shift, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. What if I am missing something? What if I've been hiding from something I could still do? Abby glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over her. The evening was supposed to be about reconnecting, about stepping back into her old world, but instead, it was unraveling something deeper within her. The doubts. The longing. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was a part of her still waiting to be rediscovered. As the night drew on, Abby found herself retreating further into the background, away from the conversations, away from the bright lights and the whispers. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, perhaps some sign, some realization that would put everything in perspective. It was then that she noticed someone else standing alone by the far wall, watching the crowd. A tall man with striking silver hair, his face familiar yet distant. Abby's heart skipped a beat. It was Lawrence again. He had been talking to a group of people earlier, but now he seemed to be standing apart, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Without thinking, Abby began walking toward him. She wasn't sure why, perhaps to confront him one last time, to put an end to the lingering doubts he had caused. But as she approached, she saw that his posture was different. The usual cocky confidence had faded, replaced with something softer, something more contemplative. Lawrence didn't notice her until she was standing right next to him. He looked over at her, a faint surprise in his eyes. Abby, he said, his voice low. I didn't expect to see you here. Alone. Abby gave a small shrug, her hands clasped in front of her. I was just thinking. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied her with that same intense gaze he always had. You know, he said after a moment, his voice quieter, almost reluctant, you could have had it all, you know. You still can. Abby looked at him, not sure whether she wanted to hear more. I'm not interested in what could have been, she said firmly. I have what I need. Lawrence's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no mockery in it this time. Maybe. But sometimes, people don't realize what they need until it's right in front of them. Abby felt her chest tighten as his words echoed in her mind. But this time, instead of feeling cornered, she felt a sense of clarity. I've already made my choice. She stood up a little straighter, meeting his gaze with a quiet resolve. I'm not going back, Lawrence. Not for you. Not for anyone. His smile faded, and for the first time that night, there was something almost human in his expression. He nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the weight of her decision. And then, without another word, Abby turned and walked away. Abby stood at the edge of the gala, the noise of laughter and conversation swirling around her. The warmth of the room, the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of a string quartet in the background, it all felt distant, like she was observing a world she no longer belonged to. It wasn't the people or the event itself that felt foreign. It was the reminder of the life she had once imagined for herself. The one where she was the center of attention, her voice carrying through grand concert halls, her name known across continents. Now, in the quiet corner of this gilded room, surrounded by people who had moved on to achieve everything she had once dreamed of, Abby felt a quiet sense of loss. Yet, beneath the layers of regret and doubt, there was something else. A quiet, unspoken truth that had started to bubble to the surface ever since she received that invitation to the gala. A part of her still longed for the stage. She had spent so many years convincing herself that she didn't need it anymore, that the life she had chosen was more than enough. And in many ways, it was. She had Daniel, the love of her life, and Emily and her younger son, Jacob. She had a family. She had a home. She had peace. But sometimes, when the house was quiet, when the children were asleep and Daniel was lost in his work, Abby would find herself humming softly, her fingers unconsciously tracing the movements of an aria she hadn't sung in years. She could still hear the music in her mind, as clear as it had been when she first learned the notes. The passion. The power. The beauty. It was like an old friend she had shut away, locked up in a distant part of her soul. Abby took a deep breath, steadying herself. She was here tonight because she had wanted to reconnect with that part of herself. To see if it was still there, hidden beneath the layers of motherhood, marriage, and the quiet life she had built. But standing in the middle of all this, with the past staring her in the face, Abby realized that it wasn't just about rekindling old dreams. It was about choosing her future. She scanned the room, her eyes drifting over familiar faces. Lawrence Blackwood had disappeared into the crowd, no doubt enjoying the attention of a room full of admirers, as he always had. She had left him behind years ago, but his words still echoed in her mind. What could have been? Could it be that he was right? Could she have had it all? The family, the career, the best of both worlds? Or had she truly made the right choice? Abby's gaze landed on the far end of the room, where a group of people were gathered around an old friend, Professor Winters, her former vocal coach. The professor was laughing, her warm eyes scanning the room, but as she caught Abby's gaze, she smiled and excused herself from the group. She made her way toward Abby, her expression soft with a kind of knowing that only someone who had seen Abby at her brightest could understand. "Abby," Professor Winters said, her voice full of warmth. "I'm glad I found you." She paused, glancing at the crowd around them before looking back at Abby. "I know this isn't easy for you. Being here, I mean. But I'm glad you came." Abby smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "But I'm glad I did." The professor studied her carefully, sensing the underlying tension in Abby's words. "You're wondering if you've made the right choice, aren't you?" The question felt too personal, but Abby didn't look away. "Maybe," she said, her voice steady. "I spent so many years thinking I made the right choice. But seeing everyone here, seeing what they've achieved." Her words trailed off, and she looked down at her hands for a moment. "It's hard not to wonder what could have been." Professor Winters placed a hand gently on Abby's shoulder. "It's natural to wonder, Abby. But remember this, you've already done something most people can't even imagine. You've built a life. A family. You've created something real. But that doesn't mean the music is gone. It doesn't mean you can't still find a way to bring it back into your life." Abby swallowed, the words sinking deep into her. Is it really that simple? She wondered. She had always believed that when you walked away from something, you couldn't return. That the door closed behind you, and that was that. But now, standing in front of the woman who had once nurtured her talent, Abby realized that maybe she had been wrong. I've been so focused on everything else, Abby said softly, almost to herself. I never thought there was room for the music anymore. Professor Winters smiled gently. There's always room for it, Abby. It's never too late to rediscover a part of yourself you've set aside. Abby felt a surge of emotion rise in her chest. She hadn't expected this conversation, this reminder of everything she had left behind. She had thought she was done with the world of opera, done with the spotlight. But now, in the warmth of the professor's words, in the quiet understanding of someone who had seen her at her best, she felt the spark reignite. But just as quickly as it flared, Abby felt a wave of doubt wash over her. What if it was too late? What if she couldn't be the person she once was? What if the life she had chosen had already erased that part of her? The questions threatened to overwhelm her, but she didn't let them take hold. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the possibility, however faint, of what might still be. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Professor Winters nodded, her eyes kind. That's all anyone can do. Just don't close the door completely, Abby. Not yet. Abby stood in silence, her mind swirling with the conversation she had just shared with Professor Winters. The words had settled into her chest, heavy with possibility but also a sense of fear. Could she really return to the life she had abandoned so long ago? Or was it simply a fleeting moment of longing, a fantasy that would never fit into the life she had built? She glanced around the room again, her gaze lingering on the faces of the other guests. They were all so assured in their success, so comfortably entrenched in the lives they had built for themselves. Abby had always prided herself on the life she had chosen, the quiet fulfillment she found in her family, her children, her home. But now, standing in this lavish room, the doubts she had long buried were resurfacing, as though the world of music was reaching out to pull her back in. It was only when the soft sound of piano keys filled the air that Abby's thoughts were interrupted. Her head snapped to the side, and she caught sight of a man at the grand piano in the corner of the room, playing a soft and intricate melody. The music was haunting, beautiful, it was like a memory come to life, one she hadn't realized she had been missing so badly. The room quieted as the notes filled the space, and for a brief moment, Abby felt her pulse quicken. It was a sound she had once known so intimately, a sound that once filled her soul. She didn't realize she had started walking toward the piano until she was standing right beside it, her eyes fixed on the man at the keys. He was young, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the piano, playing with a grace and mastery that reminded her of herself years ago, when she was a student at Westmore. For a moment, Abby simply stood there, her heart beating faster as the familiar melody flowed through the air. The sound of it was like a pull on her very soul, urging her to listen, to connect, to remember. The man paused as the piece came to an end, and he turned his head toward her, a slight smile playing on his lips. I didn't expect to see someone so moved by my music, he said, his voice warm but with a hint of curiosity. Abby's heart skipped a beat. She smiled, her voice catching in her throat. It's beautiful, she said softly, almost in a whisper. It's been a long time since I've heard something like that. The young pianist's smile widened, and he gave a small nod, as if understanding what she meant. I'm glad it resonated with you. Music has a way of doing that, doesn't it? Bringing something back to the surface. Abby nodded, her eyes glistening slightly as she struggled to keep her emotions in check. Yes, it does, she said, her voice steady now. It's been a while since I've felt that kind of connection. To the music, I mean. The pianist looked at her more closely, sensing the depth of her words. What did you play? He asked, a kind of curiosity in his tone. If you don't mind me asking. Abby felt a wave of nostalgia sweep over her as she met his gaze. I used to sing, she said, her voice soft but steady. Opera. I was at Westmore Academy many years ago. But. She paused, unsure how to explain it all. I stopped. The pianist's eyes widened in recognition. "Westmore Academy," he asked, his voice full of respect. "That's quite impressive. But you don't sing anymore?" Abby shook her head slowly. "No. I've moved on to other things." She let out a quiet laugh, as though trying to dismiss the weight of her past. "Life got in the way." The young man smiled sympathetically. "I understand," he said. "Sometimes, life has a way of pulling us in different directions." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "But it sounds like you still have a passion for it." "For the music." Abby met his gaze, her heart thudding in her chest. For a brief moment, she wondered if he was right. Was the music still there, just waiting to be rediscovered? Could she still find her way back to it, despite everything she had told herself? Before she could respond, someone called out from the other side of the room. Abby turned to see a familiar face approaching, Daniel. His warm smile was a welcome sight, and as he reached her side, his presence grounded her, reminding her of the life she had built. "There you are," Daniel said, his tone light and teasing. "I thought I lost you in all this chaos." Abby smiled at him, feeling a sense of comfort wash over her. "I was just listening to the music," she said, her voice softer than usual. She turned to the pianist, who had already returned to his seat at the grand piano. "It's been a long time since I've felt that kind of pull." Daniel nodded, his eyes gentle. "You're always going to feel that pull, Abby. It's a part of you, even if it's been quiet for a while." She glanced back at the pianist one more time, watching as his fingers danced over the keys with effortless skill. Something stirred within her, a spark of recognition, of understanding. She knew, deep down, that the music hadn't disappeared. It had simply been waiting, patiently, for her to find it again. "Maybe it's time," Abby whispered, more to herself than to Daniel. He didn't respond right away, but the look in his eyes told her he understood. "Whenever you're ready," he said softly. "I'll be here. And I'll always support you, no matter what." For the first time that evening, Abby felt a sense of calm settle over her. She wasn't sure what the future held or what path she would choose. But she knew one thing for certain, she didn't have to let go of her dreams entirely. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to have both the family, the music, and the life she had always wanted. As the night wore on, Abby felt the tug of the music grow stronger. It was no longer a distant dream, buried beneath the weight of her past. It was alive again, pulsing in her chest, waiting for her to reach out and claim it. The days following the gala were a blur for Abby. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversations, the faces, the lingering feelings that had risen to the surface. It wasn't just the encounter with Lawrence that had shaken her, it was the realization that, despite everything, the music had never truly left her. It had been there all along, waiting patiently in the background, ready to be embraced once again. But embracing it meant something more than just singing a few notes here and there, or occasionally humming along to an aria in the kitchen. It meant confronting a part of herself that she had buried for so long, a part that had been so tightly locked away that she wasn't even sure how to approach it anymore. The next morning, after a restless night filled with vivid dreams of stage lights and applause, Abby woke up to the quiet hum of her everyday life. The kids were getting ready for school, Daniel was in the kitchen making his usual morning coffee, and the house was filled with the simple comforts of routine. But beneath it all, Abby felt a restless energy, a longing to explore what she had pushed aside for so many years. "Mom, can you help me with my math?" Emily called from the kitchen, snapping Abby back to the present moment. Abby smiled and walked over to her daughter, who was sitting at the table, notebook open, pencil in hand. "Of course," Abby said, taking a seat beside her. As she helped Emily with the math problems, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her own unspoken thoughts. She had made a decision to stay home and focus on her family, and she had no regrets about that. But she also knew that her passion for music was something that couldn't simply be ignored. The question now was, what next? That afternoon, while Emily and Jacob were at school, Abby found herself wandering through the attic, a place she rarely visited. She had always avoided it, unsure of what she might find hidden up there: old memories, forgotten objects, remnants of a life she had once envisioned for herself. But today, something urged her to climb the narrow stairs and open the door. The attic was dusty, filled with boxes of old clothes, family mementos, and forgotten treasures. Abby began sifting through the boxes, each item triggering a memory of her younger self. There were programs from her performances at Westmore Academy, old sheet music that had once been filled with her notations, and photographs of her with the other students, eager, wide-eyed, and full of hope. But one item, buried at the bottom of a box, caught her attention. It was an old notebook, its cover worn and faded, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully, feeling the weight of the memories flood back as she skimmed through the pages. It was her own composition, a piece of music she had written when she was still a student, before everything had changed. The notes were delicate but full of emotion, capturing the rawness of her dreams and the uncertainty that had always lingered in her heart. Abby sat on the dusty floor of the attic, holding the notebook in her hands. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the music again. She hummed the melody softly to herself, her voice tentative at first, but growing stronger as she remembered the emotions behind the music. It was beautiful, her own creation, a reflection of who she had been and who she had yet to become. As she sat there, lost in the music, Abby realized something important. The music was never gone. It had always been a part of her, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to come forward. The question wasn't whether she could go back to her past, it was about how she could move forward with both her family and her passion for music. How could she integrate the two parts of herself that had always seemed so separate? The sound of the front door opening downstairs interrupted her thoughts. She quickly closed the notebook, wiping away a stray tear that had formed in her eye. It wasn't sadness, just a deep sense of longing, of rediscovery. She placed the notebook back in the box and carefully closed it, as if sealing away a part of herself that had been dormant for too long. Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes warm as he looked at her. "I was wondering where you went," he said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of concern. "Is everything okay?" Abby smiled at him, standing up and brushing off the dust. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady. "Just thinking about some old things." Daniel studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp, as if he could sense that something had shifted inside her. "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated, then nodded toward the box she had been sifting through. "Music," she said quietly. "I found an old composition I wrote years ago. I've been thinking a lot about it, about everything I walked away from." Daniel's expression softened, and he walked over to her, gently taking her hands in his. "You don't have to explain it to me, Abby. I know this isn't something you just turn on and off. You've always loved music. I've seen how it lights you up when you hum around the house, or when you listen to your old recordings. If it's something you want to bring back into your life, I'll support you. I always have." Abby felt a weight lift from her chest. She had known, deep down, that Daniel would understand, but hearing him say the words aloud made all the difference. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just don't know where to start." Daniel smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "Start with what feels right. You've already taken the first step by thinking about it. The rest will come in time." Abby nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. Maybe she didn't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe, for now, it was enough to simply acknowledge that part of her life, the part that had always been tied to music, was still alive, waiting for her to make space for it once again. Over the next few days, Abby found herself caught in a quiet storm of emotions. The attic discovery, along with her conversation with Daniel, had set something in motion, a feeling that she couldn't quite shake, no matter how hard she tried to focus on the everyday tasks of life. She found herself humming more often, the melodies coming naturally, like an old friend returning after years of silence. But there was also an unease that lingered in the back of her mind. The questions she had pushed aside for so long were now impossible to ignore. What if it's too late? What if I've already let go of what I loved most? She had told herself for years that she was content with the life she had built. But now, with the spark of music rekindled, she wasn't so sure anymore. One afternoon, as Abby was preparing dinner, the phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw it was an unfamiliar number. Her heart skipped, a familiar sense of apprehension filling her chest. She let it ring for a moment, her finger hovering over the decline button, but something stopped her. With a quick breath, she answered. Hello? Abby Turner? The voice on the other end was warm, but there was a clear sense of urgency. This is Rachel Dawson, the director of the community music school in downtown Opt. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Abby's heart raced. No, of course not. How can I help you? I've been hearing a lot about you, Rachel continued, her voice friendly but businesslike. I'm reaching out because we're looking for a new vocal instructor for our evening classes. We've had some wonderful students, but we've been hoping to bring in someone with more experience. And from what I understand, you were once one of the most talented students Westmore Academy ever had. Abby's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. It was one thing to think about music again, to hum in the kitchen or flip through old sheet music. But an opportunity like this? It felt like everything she had been wrestling with was suddenly right in front of her. I'm flattered, Abby said, her voice shaking slightly. But I haven't taught music in years. I'm not sure I'm the right person for the job. Rachel's voice was quick to reassure her. That's not a problem at all. We're not looking for someone to be perfect. We're looking for someone who understands the importance of music and can share that with others. And from everything I've heard about you, I believe you're exactly who we need. Abby was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had always been hesitant to step back into the world of music, even after everything had shifted. But now, standing in the quiet of her kitchen, Abby could feel the pull of something larger than herself. I'm not sure, she said slowly, her voice uncertain. I haven't been on a stage in years. And I've built a life here, with my family. Rachel didn't hesitate. I completely understand. I'm not asking you to leave your life behind, Abby. We're just offering a chance to share your gifts with others, on your terms. If it's something you'd be willing to consider, we'd love to have you come in for a trial class, see how you feel about it. Abby's heart was pounding now. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. The tug of something bigger, something outside her comfort zone, something that threatened to pull her back into a life she had thought she had left behind. But the words of Professor Winters echoed in her mind, it's never too late to rediscover a part of yourself you've set aside. I'll think about it, Abby said quietly, feeling the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. Rachel's voice softened, filled with understanding. Take your time, Abby. We'd love to have you, whenever you're ready. As the conversation ended, Abby stood there for a moment, the phone still pressed to her ear. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind, memories of the past, the uncertainty of the future, the life she had now. And yet, amid all of that, there was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time, excitement. She placed the phone down slowly, her fingers lingering on the receiver as if holding on to something more than just the call. She had always told herself that the past was behind her, that she had made the right choice. But now, faced with an opportunity to step back into that world, she felt torn. What if this was the chance she had been waiting for? What if this was the moment to finally merge the two parts of her life, her family and her passion? Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed and the house had quieted down, Abby sat on the couch, her mind racing with possibilities. Daniel sat beside her, his presence a constant source of comfort, and she found herself telling him everything about the call, about the opportunity, about the conflict she felt. I don't know if I'm ready, she confessed, her voice filled with hesitation. What if I'm not good enough? What if I'm too far removed from that world? Daniel took her hand in his touch warm and steady. Abby, you're more than enough. You've always been. It's not about being perfect, it's about doing what makes you happy, what brings you peace. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to take the next step. Abby looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He was right, of course. She didn't have to have it all figured out. The choice was hers to make, and she could take it one step at a time. She smiled at him, the weight on her shoulders lighter than it had been in weeks. Thank you, she whispered. For believing in me. Daniel smiled back, his eyes soft. Always. The decision was weighing heavily on Abby's mind. It had been days since the phone call with Rachel, and the possibility of returning to music, of teaching again, had been constantly on her thoughts. She had told herself that it was just an offer to consider, that there was no rush to make a decision. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The music had never truly left her, and the chance to bring it back into her life felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She spent the next few days wrestling with her emotions. Her mornings were filled with routine, breakfast with the kids, school drop-offs, housework. It was the kind of life she had always dreamed of. Yet, each time the house fell silent and the kids were occupied, she would find herself at the piano, running her fingers over the keys, playing fragments of songs she had once known so well. The sound was familiar, comforting, but also distant, like an echo of a life she had left behind. As the days passed, Abby started to feel the pull of her past life more and more. The quiet moments of music, the way it had once made her feel alive, the way it had connected her to something larger than herself. She remembered the energy of performing, the joy of being on stage, and the way every note seemed to flow through her, bringing her closer to her true self. But she also remembered the reason she had walked away. Her father's illness had been the catalyst for her decision to step back. Family had always come first, and that was a choice she had never regretted. But now, with her children older and her father gone, Abby felt the stirrings of something new, a desire to reconcile the parts of her life that had seemed so separate. She had built a beautiful family, a home, and a life filled with love and fulfillment. Yet, a part of her still longed for the music. The question was no longer about whether she could have it all. The question was whether she could have both without losing herself in the process. That afternoon, as she stood in front of the mirror, applying makeup for the first time in what felt like ages, Abby felt a strange sense of excitement. The gala had been a turning point, but now, the thought of stepping back into the world of music felt like the next chapter of her life. It wasn't about regaining lost fame or chasing after applause. It was about honoring a part of herself she had neglected for far too long. "Mom, are you ready?" Emily's voice interrupted her thoughts, and Abby turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, a concerned expression on her face. "Ready for what?" Abby asked, brushing her hair back from her face. "To talk about the school play," Emily said, holding up a sheet of paper with the rehearsal schedule on it. "I'm going to try out for the lead role. I think it's time." Abby smiled warmly, walking over to her daughter. "I think you'd be amazing. You've got the heart for it." Emily grinned, but Abby could see the nervousness in her eyes. "What if I mess up?" "Then you'll learn from it, just like anyone else. But I know you can do it. You have so much talent. Just like your mom." The words struck Abby deeply. Emily had always admired her passion for music, and now, with her daughter stepping into the spotlight, Abby couldn't help but see the parallel between their lives. Emily, like her, was about to take a leap into something uncertain, something that required courage and heart. And it was in this moment that Abby realized something important: her daughter wasn't the only one who had something to prove. Abby had always said that she wasn't living for the spotlight anymore, that her choice to focus on her family had been the right one. And in many ways, it had been. But maybe it was time to redefine what success looked like for her, not as a famous singer, but as someone who could still embrace her love for music, while also nurturing the family she had built. Mom? Emily's voice pulled Abby out of her thoughts, and she realized that she had been staring at her reflection for longer than she intended. I'm sorry, sweetie, Abby said, snapping back to the present. I think we should talk more about the play later. Right now, I need to think about something. Something important? Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. Abby smiled. Yeah. Something important. With that, Abby excused herself to the study, closing the door behind her. She needed some time alone, to sort through her thoughts, to make the decision that had been weighing on her for so long. She stared at the invitation Rachel had sent, the offer to join the music school. It had been sitting on her desk for days, but now it felt more real than ever. She could already feel the hesitation creeping in. What if it was too late? What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if the world had moved on without her? But as she picked up the phone to call Rachel, Abby realized that the only thing standing in her way was herself. If she didn't take this opportunity, she would never know what might have been. Abby sat in front of the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the receiver. It felt like the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts was pressing down on her. She had spent so much of her life focusing on the needs of others, her family, her children, her husband, that now, when it was time to think about her own path, it felt as if she were standing at the edge of an unknown future. With a deep breath, Abby made her decision. She picked up the phone and dialed the number Rachel had left for her. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Hello, this is Rachel Dawson, came the voice on the other end, cheerful and inviting. Hi, Rachel. This is Abby Turner, she replied, her voice steady but carrying a hint of nervousness. I wanted to let you know that I've thought about your offer, and I'm interested in moving forward. There was a pause on the other end, and then Rachel's voice lit up with excitement. Abby, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear that. We've been waiting for you to join us. When would you be available to start? Abby's heart raced, but there was also a sense of relief. She was finally taking a step towards something that had once defined her, but now, it felt like the right choice, something she could do alongside everything else she loved. I can start next week, Abby said, her words gaining strength with each passing second. I think I'm ready for this. I'm ready to help others find their voice. Rachel was quick to respond with enthusiasm. That's wonderful, Abby. We're looking forward to having you on board. We'll send you the details soon. It's going to be a great experience for everyone involved. As the conversation ended, Abby sat back in her chair, the weight she hadn't realized was on her shoulders finally beginning to lift. She had made her choice. It wasn't about fame or reclaiming a dream from her past, it was about integrating the music back into her life in a way that felt right. She could still be a mother, a wife, a woman who cherished her family. And she could also be a teacher, a mentor, someone who helped others discover the same joy in music that she had once experienced. Later that evening, Abby shared the news with Daniel. As she sat down beside him on the couch, she felt an unfamiliar sense of calm, of certainty. He had always supported her decisions, and now, his unwavering belief in her felt like the last piece she had needed to move forward. I made the call, Abby said, her voice soft but firm. I'm going to teach at the community music school. Daniel turned to face her, his expression a mixture of pride and understanding. I knew you'd make the right choice, he said, his hand resting gently on hers. I'm so proud of you, Abby. You're going to do great things. For the first time in weeks, Abby felt truly seen. She had been struggling with her identity for so long, unsure of where she fit into the life she had built. But now, with Daniel's support and the opportunity in front of her, she felt like she was beginning to understand what it meant to be whole again, to honor the parts of herself that had been neglected, while still cherishing the life she had made. The next few days were filled with excitement and anticipation. Abby found herself humming more frequently, her mind buzzing with the possibility of teaching again, of guiding others to find their voice. The classes at the music school would begin soon, and she had already started to prepare. She knew that it would take time to find her rhythm, to reconnect with the world she had left behind, but she was ready. She was determined to make this work, not just for herself, but for her family as well. One evening, as Abby sat at the piano, playing a familiar tune, Emily came into the room, standing quietly at the door. Abby looked up and smiled. "What is it, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mom, I've been thinking about the play. I know I can do it, but what if I'm not good enough?" Abby set her hands gently on the keys and walked over to her daughter. She knelt down in front of her, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice tender, "you are more than enough. You have a gift inside of you, just like I do. And I'm so proud of you for taking that first step, for believing in yourself." Emily looked up at her with wide eyes. "You think so?" "I know so," Abby replied, her heart swelling with pride. "And just like you, I'm learning to believe in myself again." As Abby spoke those words, she realized something. She wasn't just teaching Emily about pursuing her dreams, she was teaching herself the same lesson. It was never too late to start over, to go after what you truly wanted. For so long, she had held back, afraid to return to the world of music. But now, with a clear vision of her future, Abby knew that she could have both, the life she loved and the passion she had nearly forgotten. The next morning, Abby woke early, a new sense of purpose filling her. She wasn't sure exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. The music, her family, her future, they all fit together in a way that felt natural, balanced, and, most importantly, right. As she got ready for her first day at the music school, Abby felt the weight of the past slip away. She wasn't looking back anymore. She was stepping forward, embracing the next chapter of her life. Abby woke up with a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Today was the day she would step into a new chapter of her life. She had always thought that her days of pursuing music were behind her, that the family she had built was enough to fulfill her. But the moment she made the decision to teach at the community music school, everything shifted. It wasn't just a job, it was a return to herself. A return to something that had once been the center of her world. She sat on the edge of her bed for a few moments, the morning light filtering softly through the curtains. The house was quiet, with only the distant sound of birds chirping outside. The kids were still asleep, and Daniel was already up, preparing for his day. Abby took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace and anticipation settle in her chest. Today wasn't just about teaching, it was about rediscovering the woman she had been before life had steered her in a different direction. After getting dressed and eating a quick breakfast, Abby took a moment to look at herself in the mirror. She had never been one to put much emphasis on appearances, but today, she wanted to feel confident. She had decided on a simple, elegant outfit, a soft blouse and tailored pants, and a little makeup, just enough to give her that extra boost of confidence. She smiled at her reflection, feeling a sense of pride. "I'm ready," she thought. Downstairs, Daniel was finishing his coffee as she entered the kitchen. He looked up and smiled warmly at her. "Big day, huh?" Abby nodded, her heart fluttering slightly. "Yeah, it feels real now. I'm nervous, but also excited." Daniel stood up, walking over to her. "I think it's going to be amazing. You've always had a gift, Abby. And I know you're going to inspire a lot of people." Abby smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to worry about that," Daniel said with a soft laugh. "I've got your back. Always." She leaned in to kiss him, her thoughts already drifting to the new students she would meet, the classes she would teach. She wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but she knew it would be an adventure. A step forward into something she had been hesitant to embrace for so long. As the morning passed, Abby found herself pacing the house. The anticipation was almost too much to bear. She was excited, but she was also nervous about stepping into this new role. What if she wasn't as good as she remembered? What if the world of music had changed too much since she had left it behind? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Emily's voice. "Mom, I'm leaving for school." Abby turned to see her daughter, backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for another day. Abby smiled and walked over to her. "Good luck with your audition," she said, giving Emily a hug. "I know you'll do great." Emily grinned, though Abby could tell she was a little nervous. "Thanks, Mom. I'm kind of scared, but I'm going to do my best." Abby's heart swelled with pride. She remembered feeling the same way before her own performances, the same blend of excitement and fear. "You've got this," Abby said. "Just remember to have fun with it. You're going to be amazing, no matter what." Emily smiled, then turned to head out the door. Abby watched her go, feeling both a sense of nostalgia and hope. Emily was about to take her own step into the world of performance, just as Abby once had. And while she had walked away from that world, watching her daughter step into it now filled Abby with a sense of purpose. She wanted to help Emily find her own path, just as she had found hers. When the house finally fell silent after Emily's departure, Abby took one last look around before heading out the door. The car ride to the music school was filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. She replayed the conversation she had had with Rachel on the phone, her thoughts once again spinning with uncertainty and excitement. The school was a small but welcoming place, with a community of passionate musicians and students. She had no idea what the first day would bring, but one thing was clear: this was her new beginning. When she arrived at the school, Abby was greeted by Rachel, who gave her a warm hug. "We're so excited to have you with us," Rachel said, leading her inside. "You're going to love it here. The students are incredible, and they'll really benefit from your experience." Abby nodded, feeling both honored and a little intimidated. She had so much to offer, but was she ready to dive back into this world she had left behind? Could she truly inspire others when she was still figuring out how to inspire herself? As she was shown to the classroom, Abby took a deep breath. The room was cozy, with a grand piano in the center and a few other instruments scattered around the space. It felt like home. A place where music could be found in its purest form, untainted by fame or expectation. She set down her bag and took a moment to collect her thoughts. "I can do this," she reminded herself. She wasn't here to reclaim a lost dream. She was here to share the gift of music, to help others find their own voice in a world that often tried to silence it. Abby sat at the piano and ran her fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar hum of the music beneath her fingertips. It was like a reunion, one that felt long overdue. And then, the door opened, and the first student walked in. As the weeks went by, Abby felt herself growing more comfortable in her role at the community music school. The rhythm she had been searching for, the delicate balance between family and music, was beginning to take shape. It wasn't always easy. There were days when she felt pulled in so many directions that she wasn't sure where to start. But the more she adjusted, the more she realized that this wasn't about perfection. It was about being present, about finding peace in the moments that mattered most. Her classes at the music school continued to be a source of joy. Her students were eager to learn, their enthusiasm reminding Abby of the passion she had felt when she was their age. It was humbling, watching them discover their own love for music, and she found herself growing alongside them, remembering the reasons she had fallen in love with it in the first place. Teaching was no longer just a job, it had become a part of who she was. But despite the fulfillment she found in her work, Abby knew she needed to carve out more time for herself. She loved her family deeply, and they remained her anchor, but she had neglected her own needs for too long. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed by the juggling act of being a mother, wife, teacher, and artist. She had learned to make space for others, but it was time to make space for herself as well. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table, grading papers for her students, Abby glanced at the clock. It was later than she had intended to stay up, but she felt a restlessness in her chest that she couldn't shake. She stood up and walked over to the piano in the corner of the room, a place she had been returning to more and more lately. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to simply play. The familiar sound of the piano filled the space around her, and Abby closed her eyes, losing herself in the music. It was a release, a way to reconnect with the part of herself she had pushed aside. She wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't teaching. She was simply letting the music flow through her, a conversation between her soul and the keys. Her mind wandered as she played, drifting back to the days when she had been a student at Westmore, full of dreams of performing on grand stages. But life had changed, and those dreams had taken a back seat. And yet, now, as she sat at the piano, she realized that maybe those dreams didn't have to be abandoned entirely. They could coexist with the life she had now. Abby paused for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. She had spent so much of her life thinking that she had to choose one path over the other, that she could either be a full-time performer or a devoted mother and wife. But now, she saw that those things didn't have to be mutually exclusive. She could be both, in her own way, on her own terms. The thought gave her a sense of peace, and she made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to teach, continue to nurture her family, but she would also make space for her own dreams. It wasn't about returning to the spotlight or trying to relive the past. It was about honoring that part of her and allowing it to evolve alongside the woman she had become. Later that evening, as she joined Daniel on the couch, Abby felt lighter. The weight of her worries had lifted, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly present. The music was no longer a distant memory, it was part of her life now, integrated into everything she did. She wasn't trying to chase down a dream she had left behind. She was embracing the dreams she had now, the ones that included her family, her music, and her future. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, noticing the change in her demeanor. Abby smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I'm finally figuring it out. I've been so focused on doing everything perfectly that I've forgotten to just be. But I'm learning. It's about balance, and I think I'm getting there." Daniel squeezed her hand, his smile warm. "You've always been good at figuring things out. I'm proud of you." Abby's heart swelled at his words. She didn't need perfection. She just needed to be true to herself, and that meant embracing both the life she had and the parts of herself she still wanted to explore. As she rested her head on his shoulder, Abby felt a quiet sense of contentment wash over her. She wasn't sure exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to face it with open arms. The music, her family, her work, it all had a place in her life now, and she would carry it forward with grace and gratitude. The next day, Abby woke up early, feeling a renewed sense of energy. She had a full schedule ahead of her, but for the first time in a while, it didn't feel like too much. She was ready to take on the day, knowing that she had found her balance, and knowing that no matter what came next, she would continue to embrace it with an open heart. The first few months at the community music school had flown by faster than Abby could have anticipated. What started as a hesitant step back into the world of music had quickly turned into something much more fulfilling than she could have imagined. She was teaching classes, guiding her students, and watching them grow with each passing lesson. But more importantly, Abby was rediscovering a part of herself that had been dormant for far too long. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the way it made her feel, the way it helped her connect with her past while giving her something to look forward to in the future. Every day spent teaching, every note played, every voice raised in song, reminded her of who she was before life had steered her down a different path. The music was still there, still within her, waiting to be expressed. But even as she embraced this new chapter of her life, Abby knew that things couldn't stay the same. Life had a way of evolving, and she was no exception. The balance between her family life, her teaching career, and her own personal growth was delicate, and there were moments when it felt like she was walking a tightrope, trying to keep everything in harmony. She had always prided herself on being the steady one, the one who made sure the house ran smoothly, the one who kept everything in its place. But now, with her music returning to the forefront of her life, Abby was learning that she couldn't always maintain that perfect balance. Something had to give. One evening, after a long day of teaching and running errands for the kids, Abby found herself sitting in the living room, her mind swirling with the usual worries. The house was quiet, Daniel and the kids were all in bed, and for the first time in a while, she had a few moments to herself. She had just finished going over lesson plans for the next week, and she was feeling both satisfied and overwhelmed by how much she had taken on. The music had brought her back to life, but it was also demanding more from her than she had expected. The more she taught, the more she wanted to keep going, to keep growing as an artist and as a teacher. She loved it, but there was a cost. The time she spent away from home, away from her family, had started to add up. Her evenings, once filled with family dinners and bedtime stories, were now often spent preparing for the next day's lessons, practicing music, or catching up on administrative work. She knew that she couldn't keep up this pace forever. Something had to change. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. She looked up to see Daniel stepping inside, his tired face lighting up when he saw her sitting in the living room. "Hey, you're still up," he said, kicking off his shoes and walking over to her. Abby smiled faintly. "Yeah, just finishing up some things." "How was your day?" "Busy, as usual." "But it's good to see you." Daniel sat down beside her on the couch, his hand reaching for hers. "How are you doing? I can tell you've been burning the candle at both ends." Abby sighed, leaning into him. "I feel like I'm doing well, but I'm also kind of stretched thin. I'm loving the teaching, Daniel. I really am. But it's a lot. I want to be everything, a good teacher, a good mom, a good wife, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm doing any of it well enough." Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at her. "I think you're doing more than enough. You're pouring your heart into everything, Abby. But I think you need to give yourself permission to take a break every now and then, too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Abby closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. "I know. I just feel like I'm letting someone down, whether it's my students, you, or the kids. I'm trying so hard to be everything, and I'm worried I'm failing in one area or another." Daniel's hand gently squeezed hers. "You're not failing. You're human. And you're doing the best you can. I see how hard you work. And I see how much you love what you're doing. I think that's enough." Abby's chest tightened as she felt the weight of his words settle in. She hadn't realized how much pressure she had been putting on herself until now. She had been so focused on doing everything perfectly, on being everything for everyone, that she hadn't taken a moment to just breathe and accept that it was okay to ask for help, to lean on others, to give herself space to rest. "I know I need to make some changes," Abby said quietly. "I love teaching. I love the music. But I need to figure out a way to make it all work without burning out. I don't want to lose sight of the things that matter most." Daniel nodded, his thumb gently brushing over her hand. "We'll figure it out together, Abby. You don't have to carry all of this alone. Whatever you need, I'm here." The sense of relief that washed over Abby in that moment was almost overwhelming. She had been so focused on balancing everything herself, so afraid of asking for help, that she hadn't fully realized how much Daniel's support had meant. She had a partner in this journey, someone who believed in her even when she doubted herself. "I'm really lucky to have you," Abby whispered, turning her head to meet his eyes. Daniel smiled softly, his eyes filled with love. "I'm the lucky one." Abby smiled back, feeling the weight of her worries lift just a little. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew that things would continue to evolve and change. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with the people she loved by her side. The following weeks felt like a delicate dance for Abby, finding the rhythm between her passion for teaching, her commitment to her family, and taking care of herself. She adjusted her schedule, cutting back on late-night work and allowing herself more time with Daniel and the kids. She made a conscious effort to listen to her body, recognizing when she was running on empty and when she needed to take a step back. One of the first changes she made was to set boundaries. She realized that while it was important to pour into her students, it was equally crucial to pour into her family and herself. She started limiting her work hours, leaving the office at a reasonable time, and only doing school prep after the kids were in bed. She began prioritizing family dinners, where the conversation was light and filled with laughter, and bedtime stories, where she could tuck the kids in with love and attention. Despite these changes, there were still moments when the balancing act felt overwhelming. But Abby was learning to embrace the ebb and flow of life, knowing that perfection wasn't the goal. Balance, not perfection, was what she sought. One particular evening, after a long but rewarding day at the music school, Abby found herself walking through the front door, exhausted but content. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table with the kids, the aroma of homemade pasta filling the air. Abby's heart lifted as she watched them interact. Emily was animatedly talking about her school play, while Jacob was asking Daniel a series of questions about his day. "How's the play going?" Abby asked, slipping off her shoes and joining them at the table. Emily's eyes lit up. "I got the lead role, hey Mom," she exclaimed, beaming with pride. Abby's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Emily, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you." "I'm still nervous," Emily admitted, her excitement tempered by a hint of anxiety. "What if I mess up? I really want to do my best." Abby reached over, squeezing Emily's hand gently. "Sweetheart, you don't have to be perfect. You just need to give it your all. And I know you will." Emily smiled, clearly reassured by her mother's words. Abby could see a spark in her daughter's eyes, the same spark that had been in her own eyes years ago when she had stepped onto a stage for the first time. The rest of the evening was filled with the sounds of family and love. After dinner, they all sat together, catching up on the day, sharing stories, and making plans for the weekend. As Abby watched her family interact, a deep sense of gratitude washed over her. She wasn't perfect, and she would never have all the answers, but she was here. She was present. And that, she realized, was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Abby continued to settle into her new rhythm. She still felt the pull of her music, but it no longer felt like something she had to chase relentlessly. She had found a way to incorporate it into her life without letting it consume her. Teaching brought her joy, and she had finally found a balance where she could be both the mother and the teacher, the wife and the musician. One afternoon, while picking Emily up from rehearsal for the play, Abby noticed something that made her pause. Emily was standing outside with a few of her classmates, practicing a scene. The way she stood, the confidence in her movements, the passion in her voice, it reminded Abby of herself at that age. She could see the spark of ambition and determination in Emily, and it made Abby's heart swell with pride. As they drove home, Abby turned to Emily, who was nervously clutching her script. "You're doing great, honey," she said, her voice filled with encouragement. "Just keep practicing and trust in yourself." Emily looked at her mother, her brow furrowed in thought. "Mom, how do you do it? How do you keep going, even when things get tough?" Abby took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Well, sweetheart, I think the key is remembering why you started in the first place. You have to love what you're doing. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, you'll always find a way to keep going, no matter what obstacles come your way." Emily nodded thoughtfully, clearly absorbing her mother's words. Abby smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection with her daughter. It wasn't just about music or acting or any one pursuit, it was about teaching them both the value of perseverance, of doing what you love, and of knowing when to step back and take care of yourself. Later that evening, as Abby sat with Daniel, watching the kids prepare for bed, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had spent so many years chasing something that she thought was the definition of success. But now, she realized that success wasn't about being the best or having it all, it was about being present, about nurturing the parts of herself that mattered most, and about making space for what she loved. "You've been amazing," Daniel said softly, looking over at her as she finished putting Jacob to bed. "I see the way you've been balancing everything, and I just want you to know that I'm proud of you." Abby smiled, her heart full. "Thanks, Daniel. I'm proud of us. Of what we've built, and of what we're continuing to build together." As she turned off the lights and joined him on the couch, Abby felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. She had taken a leap of faith, and though the journey was far from over, she knew she was on the right path. Her music, her family, her life, they were all part of the same beautiful harmony now. And for the first time in a long time, Abby was ready to embrace whatever came next. The months passed, and Abby continued to thrive in her new role at the community music school. What had once felt like a tentative return to music was now a fully integrated part of her life. She was not only teaching students who were discovering their love for music, but she was also rediscovering her own. The music had become her bridge, a way to stay connected to her past while shaping her future. But as Abby adjusted to her new routine, she found that life, as it often does, had a way of throwing curveballs. Her teaching schedule had become busier than ever, and the demands of family life, while still fulfilling, were mounting. Between Emily's rehearsals for the school play and Jacob's soccer games, Abby had less and less time to herself. Daniel, as always, was supportive, but Abby couldn't shake the feeling that she was once again losing touch with the balance she had worked so hard to achieve. One evening, after a particularly busy week, Abby sat down on the couch, exhausted. The kids were in bed, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Daniel joined her, noticing her weariness. "Long day?" he asked, sitting beside her and wrapping his arm around her. Abby sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Yeah. It's been a bit much lately. I love teaching, but I feel like I'm constantly rushing from one thing to the next. Between that, the kids, and everything else, I'm starting to feel like I'm losing control again." Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. "Abby, you've been doing this for months now. You're allowed to feel stretched sometimes. It's normal." "I know," she said quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on her knee. "But I keep thinking about how I promised myself I would find a way to keep music in my life without losing the things that matter most. And right now, it feels like I'm losing sight of that balance." Daniel nodded, understanding her concerns. "Maybe it's time to take a step back and reassess. You've done so much already, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. But that doesn't mean you have to keep pushing yourself this hard." Abby's heart softened as she listened to him. She had always been determined, but in her pursuit of keeping everything afloat, she had forgotten that it was okay to take a step back, to breathe. "I just don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice small. "Maybe you don't have to do it all at once," Daniel said gently. "You're doing incredible things, but sometimes slowing down can help you move forward in a way that feels more sustainable. You've already made room for teaching. Maybe it's time to make room for yourself, too." Abby looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're right. I've been so focused on what everyone else needs that I've stopped taking care of myself." She paused, then smiled slightly. "I think I need to find a way to make time for the music for me, not just for the students." Daniel smiled back, his eyes warm. "Whatever you need, I'm here. We'll figure it out together." Abby felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. She had spent so much time trying to be everything for everyone that she had forgotten one crucial thing: she couldn't pour from an empty cup. If she wanted to continue sharing her love for music, she needed to nourish herself first. It wasn't about being perfect or doing everything at once, it was about finding the right pace. The next day, Abby made a conscious decision to carve out more time for herself. She started by reducing her lesson plans to a manageable number each week. She cleared her calendar on Sundays, reserving that day for rest, reflection, and personal practice. She also made sure to spend time with Daniel and the kids, savoring the moments they shared, rather than rushing through them. It wasn't easy at first. There were days when Abby felt guilty for stepping back, for not being constantly available to her students. But with each passing week, she began to realize that the world of music hadn't disappeared because she took time for herself. It was still there, waiting for her when she was ready. As Abby found her new rhythm, something unexpected happened. She felt more present in her lessons, more energized during her time with her family, and more attuned to the music that had first captured her heart. She realized that by making space for herself, she was actually able to give more, to her students, to Daniel, and to the life they were building together. But just when Abby thought she had found her new balance, an unexpected opportunity came knocking. Abby's first few weeks teaching at the music school felt like a whirlwind. She had never imagined how much joy it would bring her to watch her students grow, to help them find their own voices. Every lesson was an opportunity to give something meaningful, and in return, she felt her own passion for music reigniting in ways she hadn't expected. The students, eager, vibrant, and full of potential, reminded her of her younger self, back when she was hungry for success, driven by the love of her craft. But even with all the fulfillment she found in her work, the weight of her family responsibilities remained ever present. The delicate balance between teaching, raising her children, and nurturing her relationship with Daniel was more difficult than she had anticipated. Every day brought something new: Emily's school play rehearsals, Jacob's soccer practice, the demands of school prep, and, of course, the everyday moments with Daniel that kept her grounded. One evening, after a particularly hectic day, Abby found herself sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping her tea, and staring out the window. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that made her realize just how much she had been juggling. She had been so focused on giving her all to her students, her family, and herself that she hadn't really taken a moment to breathe. She had pushed herself so hard, constantly striving to meet the expectations of everyone around her, that she had forgotten how to simply rest. A soft knock on the doorframe interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to find Daniel standing there, his expression thoughtful but kind. "Long day?" he asked, his tone full of understanding. Abby sighed, setting her cup down and leaning back in her chair. "I love what I'm doing, Daniel. But it's so much. I want to give my students everything they need, be there for you and the kids, and still find time for myself. But sometimes it feels like I'm failing at all of it." Daniel's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, sitting down beside her. "Abby, you've been doing so much already. You're teaching, you're raising our kids, you're taking care of us. But you're only one person. You don't have to do it all at once." She met his eyes, her voice thick with emotion. "I want to be enough. For everyone. For myself. But lately, I feel like I'm stretching myself too thin." Daniel gently placed his hand over hers, his touch grounding her. "You are enough, Abby. More than enough. It's okay to ask for help when you need it. And it's okay to take time for yourself. You've always been there for all of us, and we're here for you too." Abby took a deep breath, feeling the truth of his words settle into her. She had been so determined to balance everything, afraid that asking for help or taking time for herself would somehow mean she wasn't giving enough. But Daniel was right. She didn't have to do it all alone, and she didn't have to be perfect. "I think I've been trying to keep everything in perfect order," Abby admitted, her voice soft. "But maybe perfect doesn't mean what I thought it did. Maybe it's okay to embrace the messiness of it all." Daniel smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's the first step, Abby. You're already doing so much, and you're doing it with love. That's what matters most." The next few days were a turning point for Abby. She began to simplify her schedule, cutting back on unnecessary commitments and making more room for herself. She delegated some responsibilities at work, asked for more help with the kids, and, most importantly, allowed herself to rest. She started taking regular walks, practicing her music again just for the joy of it, and, on weekends, spending quiet afternoons with Daniel and the kids. As the weeks went by, Abby began to notice the change in herself. She felt more energized, more present in her work, and more connected to her family. The balance she had been searching for was not about keeping everything under control at all times. It was about flexibility, about allowing herself the grace to adjust when things didn't go as planned. And it was about accepting that sometimes, taking a step back was exactly what she needed to move forward. One Sunday afternoon, as she sat in the living room with Emily, watching her practice lines for the school play, Abby realized how far she had come. She remembered the days when she had been so focused on her own career that she hadn't fully appreciated the small moments, like these, of joy, connection, and love. Now, as she watched Emily recite her lines with confidence, Abby felt a surge of pride. Not just for her daughter, but for herself as well. She had been patient with her own journey, had allowed herself to grow in ways she hadn't expected. Later that evening, after putting the kids to bed, Abby and Daniel sat on the porch, the night air cool against their skin. "I'm proud of you, Abby," Daniel said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. "You've found your way. And you're showing all of us that it's okay to pursue your dreams, even when life is messy." Abby leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. "Thank you, Daniel," she whispered, "for reminding me that I don't have to do it all perfectly. That sometimes, just being present is enough." And in that moment, as the stars sparkled overhead and the world felt still around them, Abby realized that the journey she was on wasn't about chasing the ideal, but about embracing who she had become. She had rediscovered the music that had once been the center of her world, and now, she had learned to weave it into the life she had built, a life full of love, fulfillment, and possibility. The night of the alumni performance had arrived, and Abby stood backstage at Westmore Academy, her heart pounding in her chest. The familiar hum of excitement and anticipation in the air reminded her of who she used to be, the young woman full of dreams, ready to take on the world. And now, here she was, years later, with a life full of different dreams, different priorities. Yet, the music had always remained with her, quietly waiting for the right moment to resurface. She glanced around, taking in the faces of the other alumni who had gathered for the event. Some of them were familiar, people she had known back in her time at the academy. Others were strangers, new faces who had since become part of this prestigious world she had once been a part of. And yet, it felt as if no time had passed. The stage, the lights, the audience, everything felt like it was waiting for her to take her place once again. "Abby Turner," a voice called from behind her, and Abby turned to see Professor Winters walking toward her, her eyes filled with warmth and pride. "I can't believe it's been so long," she said, pulling Abby into a brief but heartfelt hug. Abby smiled, feeling the weight of the past and the present settle in her chest. "I can't believe I'm back here," she replied. "I thought I was done with all of this." Professor Winters laughed softly. "You can never be done with music, my dear. It stays with you. It's in your blood." Abby felt a lump form in her throat. It was true, music had never truly left her, even in the years she had focused on other things. But now, as she stood in front of the same stage that had once seemed like the pinnacle of her dreams, she felt a deep sense of peace. She wasn't trying to reclaim anything. She was simply honoring the part of herself that had always been there, quietly waiting. As the other performers took their turns, Abby found herself lost in the music, swept up in the emotion of the night. She watched as the alumni took the stage, each performance a unique blend of talent, passion, and nostalgia. And with every note sung, Abby realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a celebration of the journey, the one she had taken, the one she was still on. When it was finally her turn, Abby felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the bright lights casting a warm glow on her. The applause from the audience was gentle but encouraging, a soft wave of support that settled her nerves. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers brushing against the keys as she began to play. The familiar melody filled the air, and for a moment, Abby was no longer the woman who had spent years balancing family and teaching. She was simply a musician, lost in the music, lost in the beauty of the moment. She wasn't performing for anyone else, she was performing for herself, reclaiming the joy that had always been inside her. The song she had chosen was one she had written years ago, a piece that had never been performed, never been heard by anyone but her. It was a part of her past, a part of the woman she had once been. And now, as she played, she realized that it was also a part of who she had become. The music flowed through her, and as her voice joined the melody, she felt the familiar rush of connection, the connection to herself, to her passion, to the audience, and to the life she had built. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about embracing the fullness of who she was, all the parts of her, mother, wife, teacher, artist, and finding harmony between them. When the final note echoed through the hall, Abby sat for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, her breath steadying. The applause that followed was overwhelming, and Abby felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. This wasn't about accolades or recognition. It was about something deeper, something more personal. She had come back to the music, but more than that, she had come back to herself. As she stood and made her way off the stage, she was met by Professor Winters, who embraced her warmly once more. "You were magnificent," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You've found your voice again, Abby. And it's more beautiful than ever." Abby smiled through her tears, grateful for the journey that had led her back to this moment. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for reminding me that it was always here." As Abby stepped off the stage, the weight that had once burdened her heart lifted. The applause still echoed in her ears, but it felt different this time, not as an expectation to meet, but as an expression of love and connection. She wasn't seeking validation from the audience. She had already found it within herself. The performance was a moment of reconciliation, a bridge between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. Backstage, she was greeted by Daniel, who had arrived just in time to see the final moments of her performance. His eyes were filled with pride as he pulled her into a hug. "You were incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Abby. You've come so far." Abby smiled, feeling the truth of his words deep in her bones. "It wasn't about being perfect," she replied softly. "It was about being real. About reconnecting with that part of me I've ignored for too long." Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand. "And you did it. You gave yourself the freedom to be who you are, without apologies." As they walked through the backstage area, Abby felt a sense of calm she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the performance itself, but everything it represented. The journey of letting go, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, and of accepting that she didn't have to be anything other than who she truly was. A mother, a wife, a teacher, an artist, each part of her was valuable, and none had to be sacrificed for the others. As they drove home, the quiet night around them seemed to mirror the peace Abby felt inside. She thought about her students, the lessons she had taught, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away from the world of music all those years ago. She had grown, changed, and evolved. And now, she could carry the music with her, not as a lost dream, but as a part of her living, breathing life. At home, the kids were asleep, and the house was still. Abby and Daniel sat on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light around them. For the first time in a long time, Abby didn't feel like she was running from one thing to the next. She was present, in this moment, with the people who mattered most. "I'm glad we're here," Abby said, looking over at Daniel. "I'm glad I'm here, with you, with the kids. I've spent so many years chasing after something I thought I needed, and now I realize everything I need is already here." Daniel smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. "And you've always had everything you needed within you. You just needed to give yourself permission to see it." Abby leaned against him, feeling the weight of his words sink into her. "I think you're right," she whispered. "I've spent so long believing that the only way to be successful was to be someone I wasn't. But tonight, I finally realized that I can have it all. Not in the way I once imagined, but in the way that's true to who I am now." As they sat there together, Abby realized that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. She would continue to teach, continue to nurture her family, and continue to make music. She didn't need to choose one over the other anymore. She could be both, the woman who shared her love for music with others, and the woman who cherished her life at home. The music would always be a part of her. But it wasn't something she needed to chase anymore. It was something she could carry with her, woven into the fabric of her life. Abby smiled, feeling the weight of the past finally fall away. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, a quiet sense of peace wrapped around her like a blanket, knowing that she had found her balance, not just in the music, but in the life she had built. A life filled with love, passion, and possibility. Her journey was not defined by the choices she had made in the past, but by the choices she was making now. And in that, Abby found her true freedom.